Greetings. I'm Cindy Romer, Chair of the MSA Coalition. Welcome to our session today. I'm thrilled to not only have the attendance of our international partners, but such active participation of our partners. This session is going to follow up to those provided by Aramis and MSA Belgium. So without delay, I'm going to go ahead and provide a brief introduction to our speakers and the moderators to today's sessions. Dr. Patrick Kraas, presently the chairman of the Department of Neurology of the Antwerp University Hospital and professor of neurology at the University of Antwerp. His research focuses on biomarkers, neuropathology, and phenotype-genotype correlation of neurodegenerative diseases. He is served as a principal investigator in numerous industry-sponsored studies with different compounds in Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease, and of course, has worked considerably with MSA. He is here today as a representative of MSA Belgium. And Pierre-Olivier Fernigat graduated from the University of Bordeaux, where he did his PhD on the development of mouse models in MSA. He has focused his work on interactions between alpha-synuclein and pesticides and was appointed in 2007 as a researcher at the French National Center for Scientific Research. His interests are to identify disease mechanisms and operate his preclinical validation of disease-modifying strategies in MSA. So I need to be very clear, we are so happy that you are so dedicated to MSA. And Dr. Fernigat is here today as a representative of our partner in France, Aramis. Also with us today are moderators. I am pleased to introduce Karen Walker. Karen was a member of the board and very active of MSA Trust, our partners across the pond, serving the UK and Ireland. And from that role, she served as interim CEO and has since moved to the position of Chief Executive Officer. And she's been holding that position since November of 2015. Karen was actually a personal friend of the Trust's founder, Sarah Matheson. The MSA Coalition and the MSA Trust have been working together for years and very pleased to have their participation. And if you haven't already seen, there is a presentation offered by the MSA Trust nurses that I strongly encourage you to view. Finally, we have Elaine Dayesaba from Harvard. He has conducted his medical training at the Medical University of Innsbruck, Austria, with a focus again on MSA under the mentorship of Professor Gregor Wenning and Professor Nadia Stepanova, as many know, are leaders in the MSA field. He's been actively engaged in fostering public awareness as a member of the Bishop Dr. Carl Gulser Foundation, again, another of our MSA partners. Since 2019, he's been conducting research at the lab of Professor Vic Coronas at Brigham and Women's Hospital, Harvard Medical School. And as everyone knows, Dr. Corona is a member of the MSA Coalition Board of Directors. So we are very, very happy to have this very distinguished global panel here with us today. Karen and Elaine are going to lead the session in terms of questions that you have as an audience. Normally, we have a Q&A button, which is what we use for questions. Apparently, we're having some difficulty with the technology on that, so we're going to ask that you go ahead and use chat to submit your questions to us. Should that other feature become up and running, we will go ahead and let you know. Without further delay, I'm going to turn the floor over to our moderators to begin the session. And again, thank you to everyone.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us. I can see that we have some questions beginning already, and unfortunately, just at the moment, we are having to use the chat button rather than the Q&A button. So please just keep putting your questions in there. Alan and I have our eyes glued, and we will make sure that we get the questions ready to put to our distinguished guests. So, Alan, shall I pass over to you for the first question?
Sure. Thanks, everyone, for joining the session with us. I'd like to read the first question to Dr. Kraas. and that is, do you see telemedicine as part of multidisciplinary care for MSA? And what is the status of telemedicine in Europe?
Well, actually, until a little bit more than a year ago, I don't think we had a lot of experience with telemedicine in Belgium. But with the arrival of the pandemic, all of a sudden this started to boom. I'm sure that telemedicine has and will continue to play a role in our patient contact because of its low threshold, the fact that we now have all these platforms with which you can easily reach the patient. Telemedicine is even incorporated in some of the new electronic patient files. So I think it's here to stay. It certainly has an advantage when people have to travel, for example, to reference centers if they have to travel for long distances. Many of our societies, both patient support organizations and societies, are now drafting guidelines on how to perform good telemedicine, because obviously it also has their limitations. You cannot really examine the patient, even though you might be able, with the help of an assistant, try to do some form of neurological examination, but I mean, everybody is aware of the fact that this is quite difficult. I also think that when communication becomes more difficult for patients, telemedicine will even add to that, to these difficulties. Also, there's, as you can imagine, there's a lot of non-verbal communications going on in the consultation room. So often when we talk to people, we pay attention to their non-verbal communication, also non-verbal communication of a caregiver or multiple caregivers if they are present. So I think it certainly has its advantages, but also clear disadvantages. At least in Belgium, there is reimbursement now for telemedicine. And I guess, I'm not sure about other European countries, but I guess reimbursement is either there or will come in many countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kras. And also, just as I would reiterate what you were saying, because we certainly have heard from the consultants that we work with in the UK that while it's great to have the telemedicine, there have been some real issues in terms of people not actually getting a face-to-face consultation. And I think that has increased dramatically the number of recent diagnoses. So it certainly is, I think, an issue. We also, obviously very current at the moment in the news, was the disappointing results that came from Biohaven very recently. I don't know if everybody had seen the press release. And I just wondered, this is a question I see to Dr. Fernagut, and everyone is very disappointed by the recent Biohaven trial news. Do we have the wrong animal models? What do we need in order to see future successes with new potential therapeutics? And perhaps actually that might be something that Dr. Fernagut might talk about. Also maybe Patrick, you might also wish to comment on that.
So do we have the wrong animal models? It's always a recurrent question. You know that MSA is a disease that only occurs in humans, not in animals. So the best that we can do in animals is to try to reproduce as best as we can based on our current understanding of the disease, some of the mechanisms. And right now the main strategy is to target the expression of alpha-synuclein specifically in oligodendrocytes, because that's a key feature of MSA. That being said, this is not enough in itself to fully reproduce MSA. So this is an intrinsic limitation of all animal models for all diseases. Sorry, they will reproduce some mechanisms and not all of them. So some may not be accessible. Then specifically with regard to the Biohaven trial, and so the therapeutic target in this trial, which is an enzyme that's called myeloperoxidase. There had been one study in a transgenic mouse model of MSA showing that the myeloperoxidase inhibition could improve the mouse model, but the effect in the mouse model was significant, but it was not maybe the strongest effect that we have ever seen in animal models. So basically, something that works really strong in an animal model is potentially a candidate for further development. If the effect in the animal model is only mild, let's say, perhaps it means that the target is not, or the drug is not strong enough. And then the animal models can be seen also as tools that can be both for positive identification and also negative identification. Means that something that works in an animal model, it may work in the human disease, but we have no guarantee about that. That's the limitation of our work, unfortunately. And as I mentioned, it's the same for all diseases. But what we do know is that the negative predictive value of the animal models is also something important, meaning that a drug that's tested in an animal model, if that drug doesn't work in the animal model, at least we know that probably we can eliminate this one from the panel and focus on something else. So they're used as screening tools in any case with their limitations. But just to finish with in the press release, Biohaven has still maintained his willingness to continue to develop therapeutic strategies on MSA. So I think that it's still a good news that they are not giving up. You know, they are disappointed, of course. We all understand that, but they're still willing to engage the fight. So it's good.
Dr. Farnacki, in your answer, you mentioned that there might be we might be missing a difference when translating from animals to humans. And since you're a leading expert in animal research, I know that several groups work on non-human primates with the hypothesis that they might more closely resemble what is happening in the humans. And I was wondering, what is your sense on this research? Do you think it might move us closer to seeing findings that reflect what happens in the human brain? Is there any indication of that?
Yes, definitely, because the anatomical organization of the primate brain is much closer to the human, and we know that to some extent the alpha-synuclein propagation involves, you know, connections between neural systems. And so if you are in a model in which the connectivity in the brain is closer to the human brain, you will be in conditions that will be closer to the human disease. And then it's also based on the strategy that's used to begin with to model the disease. That can be first developed in rodent models, and once it's been refined in rodent models, we can keep the non-human primate models for the most promising candidates.
That's encouraging.
Dr. Kraus, would you have any other comment you'd like to make around the use of animal model?
Oh, no, absolutely. My colleague gave an excellent description of how animal models are now used. Obviously, the ultimate test for a drug is in humans, and there's several challenges that we face when studying and treating a rare disease such as MSA, because you need to have the right outcome. And possibly that should be an outcome that is really relevant to the patient, that is clinically relevant, not only a biomarker, as we've seen in other types of diseases. A biomarker might help to try to define the position of a particular drug very early on, whether it has some promise and can be developed further. But the outcome should be, in the end, relevant for patients. So we're disappointed that this particular trial failed, but let's be hopeful and continue like this. Thank you.
Thank you. We have also a follow-up question, actually, to Dr. Kraas, which is about for patients for whom reference centers are not convenient, do you consult with their local physicians? And has there been any work on developing a standard of care that can help those in more rural areas get the best possible care?
Well, first of all, we need to know what a reference center is, because even in movement disorder clinics, at least in Belgium, in my experience, even in movement disorder clinics, the experience of neurologists is limited. We see, personally, I see about 20 patients suffering from MSA. And some people that are very friendly call us a reference center, but I'm not sure if that's really true. What is a reference center? I don't think there's people that see hundreds and hundreds of people with MSA, like we see people with multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's disease or stroke. So the experience, even in the so-called reference centers, is limited. And there's a lot of patient heterogeneity. Not everybody's the same. So, I mean, the problems that you're faced with as a neurologist tend to change, although evidently there are also common problems in people with MSA. So you need to have a definition first of what a reference center is. And I personally, I don't believe in the fact that everybody can be cared for in a reference center. I think we need to involve the whole chain of healthcare workers that are involved in treating a person with MSA. You need to involve the general practitioner, you need to involve the physiotherapist, you need to involve the local neurologist that may have referred the patient to you for a second opinion, for example. So I think you need to engage this whole chain of healthcare workers involved with the patient. So what's going on now in Europe is that there's networks of people involved in the treatment of people with rare diseases in the context of European subsidized networks. And at least what we can do is to exchange good practices with our colleagues in the different European countries. That's what's happening right now, and it's been there for a while, especially in neuromuscular diseases, in epilepsy, in other rare conditions, and it's also being reinforced now for people with atypical Parkinsonisms and rare diseases in general.
Alain, I think you're up next.
Yeah, thank you very much for this very extensive and useful answer. So another question here in the chat box is there a role for massage in the multidisciplinary approach for treating rigidity and muscle tightness from MSA and deconditioning from full-time use of a wheelchair? I think this is a question for probably Dr. Kraas.
Well, physiotherapy is certainly not limited to massage, and I'm sure physiotherapists are professionals, and they would not accept that they would only do massage. I mean, massage is one of the interventions that they practice, but they do much more than that. And I don't think that deconditioning, which happens very often in chronic neurological disease, in any type of disease that confronts people with reduced muscle strength, incoordination, and mobility problems. I don't think that massage alone would help to fight the deconditioning and the loss of muscle strength. You need to do much more, and the physiotherapist is well placed to help people doing all sorts of therapies. These therapies can involve massage, but they would certainly also involve muscle strengthening, conditioning through long activities that are practiced over a longer time. So that helps your general cardiovascular fitness. You might think, and the discussion has been going on for many years in many chronic neurological diseases, whether that is helpful. Personally, I think it is helpful. I think that movement with the possibilities and the limitations that you are confronted with, I think movement and physical exercise in general is very helpful. So not only massage. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question
Karen,
is...
you were talking, but your microphone was mute.
I realized, but thankfully Alan took over. He also realized.
So there's another question for Professor Cross, and that is that in America, they're starting with a trial with gene therapy. And the question is this already possible in Europe to participate in a gene therapy trial?
No, not that I know of. Pierre-Olivier, do you have an idea?
So I'm not aware of any gene therapy trial for MSA in Europe. There have been only few gene therapy trials in Europe in the field of movement disorders. This is something that's it's even heavier to set up this kind of clinical trials compared with a regular clinical trial with a drug. Because you need intervention, you need brain surgery for that, and injection of a viral vector in a specific area of the brain. So these trials usually enroll a very limited number of patients, and so even if there would be such a trial available in Europe, the number of people eligible would be quite low. It's usually between 10 and 20 patients at most. I mean, from the examples that come to my mind, I don't know, Professor Cross, if you have other examples of gene therapy trials in Europe.
No, certainly not in MSA that I'm aware of.
I just want to mention, actually, to our lovely audience that we can't take individual requests for, that are related to your direct case. Of course, questions on different aspects of living with MSA are perfectly acceptable. But if you wish, we will try to answer those separately at the end of the conference. So yes, moving on. One question though that we do have is, do you have any suggestions around the physical muscle strengthening conditioning exercises where people can get information on those, like from a website? And I must say that actually, if you do go onto the MSA Trust website, there are some fact sheets that give you some detail around exercise and around fatigue and managing a lot of those aspects of MSA. So please do look on that website, and hopefully that might give you some guidance.
To follow up on that, we have the same kind of leaflets on Aramis website, dedicated to speech therapy, physiotherapy, and all kind of global interventions that can be helpful for the patients. And so it was inspired by the work that's been done with the MSA Trust, actually. And so for people, for French-speaking people, you can go to the website of Aramis and you will find resources regarding those options and those that are quite useful for the patients.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely, and yeah,
and
absolutely,
also,
and in collaboration with our local MSA society, we've also translated some of the documents that were either in English or in French in order to help our Belgian, Dutch, Flemish-speaking people.
Great, thank you for that. That's really helpful. They call also, I'm just being reminded that the MSA Coalition also have a comprehensive booklet around MSA, so please, participants in this session, please do take a look at the respective websites, and I'm sure you'll get some information that might be able to help. Okay, do you have a question that you wished to raise with our respected speakers?
Karen,
yes,
can
I would
I
like
intervene? I'm sorry.
Of course.
Because I think that some of the individual questions might be actually worthwhile discussing, because they might have a more general nature. Because we talked about telemedicine in the beginning, and I don't think telemedicine is appropriate for anybody, in the sense that you have to have already a patient-doctor relationship in order to have telemedicine to work. You cannot provide any consultation like that to people at the other end of the world just by telemedicine. I don't think that would work. If you have, you can use it for continuity of care, but you have to develop a patient-doctor relationship first, so that it would work in the future.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think actually possibly this period that we've had over the last 18 months has really shown that there are big advantages to telemedicine and being able to carry on with patients that are already registered with you. But for the patients that are coming in with symptoms and are not actually diagnosed, that it really becomes very difficult. And I think certainly we would be in agreement with that. Oh gosh, my screen suddenly jumped around a bit there. Over to you, Alan.
Dr. Cross, would you like to?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't want to disrupt the whole discussion, but I couldn't raise my hand. Normally you can raise your hand on Zoom, but I couldn't. There was another issue that I wanted to raise, because somebody answered the question, again, an individual question, about how to find a specialist. And I talk about this with my patients a lot. How do you recognize somebody who's a specialist? Well, you can find specialists, obviously, on websites, such as the Movement Disorder Society website. But in general, how do you recognize a specialist? First of all, a specialist is probably somebody specialized in movement disorders. Neurology has been specializing a lot, and you've got now people that treat headaches as well as multiple sclerosis, and you have also people that deal with movement disorders for most of their daily work. That's one requirement, I would say. Often specialists can also, they usually have a track record of publications about a particular subject, in this case, MSA. And they're usually good teachers, specialists. They are also not afraid to ask for a second or a third opinion. So if a patient remains with questions for the specialist, somebody who's a specialist is usually not afraid of referring to another specialist, because again, we work in networks. I just wanted to emphasize it.
And if I may follow up on that, and that brings to one of the comments by Rich James that says that in Belgium they have improved a lot these things thanks to the Belgian association who can refer patients to physicians that have expertise in MSA depending on where they live. And we also have the same system in France. So we have the chance in France to have a national organization because there has been a national plan for rare disease that funded the establishment of reference centers for rare disease. So we have one reference center and we have what they call competence network that are the nodes of the network, and that allow to have a pretty good geographical coverage. And so we have on the website of Aramis a map of the country in which each center can be seen, and so people can quickly find out the closest physician with expertise on MSA based on where they live. And this is where associations are really important for that, is that they can really help people gain a lot of time and finding a physician who are familiar with MSA and atypical Parkinsonism.
Thank you. Yes, and I think that is developing a bit more, certainly here in the UK. We are now working very closely with the neurologists, and our nurses are now suggesting to them that if they can gather up their MSA patients, we will make sure one of our nurses attends the clinics, and that has a big effect on how best people can be supported. But we are also interested in doing some further research on that, and one of our recent call, we hope to get some papers that might want to look at furthering the best possible way of caring for people with MSA within the clinical network. So let's hope something happens. And that brings very neatly onto this wonderful question about, if you had $1 million to spend on MSA research, what type of research projects would you fund? And I better be ready to take notes on this and to share with the panel. But please, first of all, I think Pierre-Olivier, if you would like to go first, and then perhaps Patrick, you would go after.
Sure. So I believe I would fund research that would make a deep dive into trying to understand what's going on inside the oligodendrocytes, because we know that we have alpha-synuclein that form inclusion in those oligodendrocytes. We know that the structure of this alpha-synuclein filament is different between MSA and PD. So we know that those filaments of alpha-synuclein have something that's unique to MSA in terms of their shape and also in terms of where they're going to aggregate. And we know that those aggregates of alpha-synuclein, they disrupt the functioning of oligodendrocytes. They don't work well. They will degenerate to some extent, but mostly they clearly don't work well. And right now, we know very little about all the mechanisms of oligodendroglial dysfunction. And I think that this would be an area of research that would be promising, because it's a way with some kind of targeted therapy directed towards oligodendrocytes to, if we identify mechanisms, we can try to correct that kind of dysfunction.
Great. And Patrick, what about you?
I completely agree. The answer is going to come from fundamental research, without doubt. The question is a little bit like in other types of inclusion diseases, in Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, Huntington's, and other types of inclusion diseases, whether the inclusions are really the culprit, and that you really have to, it's something that can define the disease on a neuropathological level. The question is, if with your therapy you have to approach that particular inclusion, or whether the inclusion is something like an epiphenomenon of the disease. And we've known and we've experienced that with, let's say, with some regret for Alzheimer's disease, for example. It's possible to treat the abnormal protein deposition, but it's not clear whether that really helps the patient. So, but again, I think the answer is going to come from fundamental research. So I completely agree with Pierre-Olivier, but we need to pick our targets right. I'm here on the clinical side, so I have to propose a clinical experiment, and a lot of $1 million is a lot of money, and still not a lot of money, because, as you know, research costs a lot of money. I would something. I personally, I believe a lot in physical activity. And I know that this type of trial is very difficult to do, but I would engage in a project in which we have people working together. And with people, I mean people suffering from MSA, get them together as a group. We have that technology because you can easily make a sort of an informal network. We see that in virtual cycling, virtual running, other types of virtual activities where you practice in your own home with some form of apparatus, each person at a different level, but you get together, and at the same time, you can also exchange messages. I would propose something like that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have another question for Dr. Cross, and that would be, in your video, you mentioned hospice services. When do you typically prescribe hospice? Which services are helpful to the patient and the patient's family?
Well, if I understand the question right, hospice is something that you don't really prescribe hospice. It's something that depends a little bit, no, not a little bit, even to a great extent, on the formal and informal network that people have with a primary caregiver, with family, other informal caregivers, with the healthcare that you can provide, with financial possibilities in order to have company, physiotherapy and other types of therapy that you can make available. Also the general condition of the patient, and hospice care, part of palliative care, is not something that you prescribe, but is usually the best option in a particular circumstance. As far as palliative care is concerned, and also difficult decisions that people have to make, for example, to resort to hospice care, most of what we do is actually palliative care. So we always try to help and care for people, and we know that the disease cannot be cured. We're doing palliative care most of the time. So I don't really prescribe hospice care, but you know that the caregiver is also a very fragile part of that system. You don't suffer as a patient from MSA alone. It's the whole family that suffers, and there's usually some breaking point, and you have to see that coming as a family, and also as a physician or another healthcare worker, a psychologist involved in care.
Thank you. Yeah. I realized we slightly missed a question around the collaborative approach, and that is concerning that each general area has support groups that are supported by a general MSA organization or coalition. Do you see us in the future having a more collaborative approach with these many groups to provide researchers with subjects and/or input for future trials? perhaps we exclude ourselves from this question as we've decided to leave the European Union. Never mind. Certainly not my choosing, but I think it's, my feeling is we must work collaboratively. But what do you feel about that? Pierre-Olivier, if I can come to you first, and then Patrick, if you could.
Well, in my opinion, this is what's going on right now. We have people from France, UK, Belgium. This is something that has never happened before. And if you look back, so some years ago, it started in the US as a Yahoo group. It started in the UK thanks to the Sarah Matterson Trust. It started in Belgium with Rich Schupmoens. It started in France with a few people building up an association. And, it builds up on that, and we're all there right now. So I believe it's working, and I believe that the collaborative effort went naturally, and hopefully it's going to continue like that. I see no other reason for.
Good, I'm glad. Patrick, your thoughts?
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And what's more, you see more and more either patient support groups or individual people being involved in all sorts of levels of discussion, be it with the government, be it in scientific societies, being it in regulatory authorities, and also in science. I think what we should probably do more, and I'm not setting up a trial for treatment of MSA right now, but what we should probably do more, and maybe this is a message that could be sent to the pharmaceutical companies, is that they should listen also to patients and patient support groups in order to define the right outcome criteria. What is important for people? What do they consider the most important problem they're faced with? And is this an adequate outcome criterion for a trial?
I think if our nurses, specialists have been able to join right now, Patrick, they would be clapping for your saying thank you for saying that, as they have often said that this is how they would like research to be more developed. And that's partly why we have gone down the route of dividing our research to still get that core scientific research, but also to look at what happens on the clinical side. So that's great to hear.
Okay, so we have two more questions in the chat box. One of them is there any blood test or skin biopsy to show you have the alpha-synuclein? I think I would refer this question to Dr. Fernagu for now, since you've already talked about synuclein forms, different aggregates forming between Parkinson's, MSA, and I think this might be.
I'll try to answer, but I know that Professor Cross has also worked on biomarkers, so his input will be quite valuable on that one. From my knowledge of biomarkers, so we can detect alpha-synuclein in the skin, in the blood, but it's the tests that we have right now are not sensitive and not powerful enough to be able to discriminate between Parkinson's disease and MSA. So there are some other biomarkers that are being scrutinized to see whether they would be more specific of MSA. One of them is something that's called neurofilament. This one could be a little bit more specific for MSA. And so as the research effort on biomarker progresses, hopefully at some point we will come up not maybe with one single biomarker, but some kind of a composite biomarker composed of several elements that will help to discriminate between MSA and other atypical Parkinsonism. So I know that there are a lot of research effort in this direction right now.
Yeah, and adding to that is that more and more we are involving functional imaging with radioactive ligands. And we know that even though there are similarities between Parkinson's disease and MSA, there are also differences in the sense that different parts of the brain are affected. And if we have the right radioactive ligands so that we can localize the deposits, it might be more useful to use functional imaging like PET scans, for example.
A follow-up question to you, Dr. Kraas. In terms of ancillary testing for BCCs to discriminate Parkinson's and MSA, from your clinical perspective, what are the best leads, or what are the best tools that can help us or help the clinical diagnosis to become more confident in what disease we have in a patient?
And in any case, and this might sound very old school, I think that the history of the patient and the clinical examination are very important. So you need somebody who's really familiar with the clinical presentation and who spends sufficient time. Many neurologists, and I'm also to blame, spend less time with the patient, and you start prescribing all sorts of ancillary tests immediately, like DAT scans and PET scans and other types of scans. But I think the clinical examination is really important. So it's first of all a clinical diagnosis.
Thank you. I am being nudged to say that we are actually running out of time. And so we have one final question. And that is, well, it's a great one to wrap up with. When do you expect a good drug to be helping us? And will this be soon or not? I think that's the $50 million question, but I will ask Pierre-Olivier, if you would start. When do you think we'll have a good drug?
That's a tough one to finish. I cannot give a date for sure. Of course, I would like it to be as soon as possible, like all of you. The only thing I know for sure for the moment is that the research effort on MSA has never been any stronger than it is now, and it keeps on being bigger and bigger in terms of funding, in terms of research groups involved in MSA, and more importantly, in terms of pharmaceutical companies and biotech companies getting interested in MSA and launching clinical trials. If you look back 10 years ago, there were no clinical trials for disease-modifying therapy in MSA, none. There were a few clinical trials to look at disease progression, but no interventional trials. Right now, there are several ones ongoing. It's just a matter of number, because there's a lot of attrition in terms of drug development. And so the more companies we have engaging into clinical trials, the more likely we will have something at the end. So the light at the end of the tunnel that I see right now is this perspective, is having a lot of companies interested in MSA. I see it at my preclinical level. We have a lot of contact with companies, willing to test compounds or strategies. And this already has translated into several clinical trials. So this effort is rising. That's for sure. Then when it's going to be successful, yeah, unfortunately, I don't have an answer for that one.
Yeah, if I may add, the question is also what you consider a good drug and what you consider a successful treatment. I think, and I don't want to sound too pessimistic, but I think we have to you have to have modest expectations. We might expect something that slows the disease, might influence the development of further lesions, prevent neuronal loss. I don't think we will have very soon a type of treatment that will be restoratory, in the sense that that we can easily provide or restore a function. I don't think that's going to happen. But if we can influence the disease in some way, I think that would be a really a realistic and helpful outcome.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you very much for that. And just one final little comment to make, which is from Richard James, saying, know that patients are willing to test for trials and they're very happy to be contacted. So, but thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And we are very grateful for that also.
So over to you, Cindy.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. It's been my pleasure to be in this room with each of you. The work that you're doing is fantastic. I'm so happy that representation from around the world is here and we can continue with that work. You know, we look forward to moving forward, and under the work of the Global Consortium, other countries are represented as well. So for all of you out there, know that we are continuing to work together so that we can bring you more sessions like this one and help everyone. So individually, Dr. Frenneke, Dr. Cross, thank you so much. Karen, Elaine, thank you. And to your organizations that you represent, RMIS, MSA Belgium, MSA Trust, Bishop Carl Gulser Foundation, many thanks. We look forward to continuing to work together with each of you. This has been a great session, and to the audience, thank you for joining us. There's lots of good sessions from both our community partners, all of those featured here today, as well as a few stateside organizations such as MSA New Jersey and the Brain Support Network, and of course a featured session by Dr. Gregor Wenning on Saturday morning. And of course, our main sessions being hosted by the folks at the Mayo Clinic. So many thanks to all of you for participating, and have a wonderful day, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.